So as tonight is the first Friday of the month, we have a guest speaker. So our speaker tonight is Elissa.
Thank you, Louise. I'm Elissa, I'm an addictive eater, and it's a real privilege actually to be here tonight and to have the opportunity to share my story. I've discovered this really cool feature on Zoom, which is where you can hide your self-view, which is great because then you don't have to have your own image like hovering in the corner there distracting you. So if I start going off the screen, Louise, you'll have to let me know. Anyway, so I guess what it was like is a really good place to start. My earliest memories of this disease are actually not with the food. My earliest memories of this disease are with the feelings that are actually described in the big book of being irritable, restless, and discontent. And I remember from a very early age, as a very young child, feeling a tension inside of me that I couldn't explain or articulate, but I knew that it didn't feel right. And as a young child, I would often lie in my bed and I had a little bit of an obsession with stretching. And it was like I was trying to stretch to fit into my own skin. And I would get really, really, really frustrated because I could never fit. And looking back now, I see that as just the part of this disease, which is a kind of a longing, I think, to belong. And not feeling like I know my place, or I guess not really knowing who I was. I think from a very early age I had that feeling of being lost. I was always quite irritated with people around me. I had, you know, everyone has different traumatic things happen in their life, and I had a couple of things happen in my life when I was quite young. I grew up with a parent who was quite unwell, and I guess to cut a long story short, I blamed these events and these people in my life as the reason for why I felt the way I did. And when I always played with my food when I was little. I'd come home from school and I'd make lots of different concoctions. I was quite obsessed with recipe books and making recipes, and I was always making meringues because they were easy to whip up and they always turned out pretty good, other than the one time that I put salt in the recipe instead of sugar. And it was devastating because I remember tasting the batter before it went into the oven and thinking, this doesn't taste right, but maybe if I cook them, they'll come out and they'll taste better. And they came out the most beautiful batch of meringues. And I remember like in anticipation wanting to try one just to see, and trying it, and then finally it dawning on me that I must have used salt instead of sugar and having to throw them all out. That was absolutely devastating. But I did a lot of baking, a lot of concocting. We had a microwave in our family, so I'd come home from school and concoct all kinds of dishes, baked potatoes and wheat bix dishes, and basically whatever I could get my hands on. But it wasn't really till I hit my teen years that I felt like the obsession really took off. I had a friend at high school who was doing a liver cleansing diet, and once I had heard about that, it was kind of my first real exposure to people around me dieting. And I decided that I was going to buy the book and I was going to do the diet. And that was the start of a series of health-based diets and an obsession with healthy eating. And when I was off the diet, extremely unhealthy eating and a lot of guilt, and then having to find the next diet to get me back into, you know, healthy eating again. And along with this came exercise. So in my head, the worst possible thing that ever could happen to me would be to become overweight. And so I had this real obsession with exercising. It started maybe, I kind of remember as an early teenager, my dad had a rebounder, and I'd get up before everyone else in the family. I'd be downstairs out on the deck doing all these rebounder exercises. And then I began walking everywhere. And later on I would run. And even today, when I see people running, I get this kind of sense inside of me, that old feeling of, oh, if I could run like that. Because there was this sense of maybe tension release that came when I did an exercise that kind of gave me this freedom from this tension that I was feeling inside of me. So lots of different health diets, lots of exercise, and I also use laxatives as a way of trying to control my weight as well, and starving, so periods of not eating, as a way of making sure that I didn't put any weight on. I think the food for me was always there in the back of my mind. It got more and more intense as time went on. But the real issue that I had in my life was the way I related to other people. And this is kind of what I see today as a part of the disease that I didn't really understand for quite a while. I always had a difficult relationship with my mother. Once I got married to my husband, I couldn't really stand him either. When I had children, they kind of got in the way of my life. I never really had good friendships, because if I had a friend, I would either be completely obsessive with them, wanting to talk to them all the time, spend time with them all the time, or if I felt like they were getting too close to me, I'd be pushing them away. And so I never really had any relationships that were very quality relationships. I also, I'll just mention here, grew up with a real spiritual hunger. So I was in a home where we believed in God, and we belonged to a faith. And I always had a real hunger to know God again. I'd get up really early in the morning and do Bible study and all that kind of stuff as a way of trying to understand this concept of a higher power. And I feel like I just kind of limped through life. Well, actually, that's not true. I didn't feel like I was limping through life. I felt like I was really successful, because I was very strong and very capable, and I pushed my way into whatever situation I wanted. So I was always determined to be better than my friends when I was at university, to get better grades than them. When I got married to my husband, I couldn't stand the fact that he was going to be the breadwinner. I was determined to earn as much money as he could, which was never going to happen. So when I had 2 6-month-old twin babies, I decided I was going to retrain as a hypnotherapist, because maybe if I could figure everyone else's life out, I could figure out my own life too. And when I did that training, I was willing to leave my family, my husband, my 17-month-old son, oh, he would have been 2 then, my 2-year-old son, and my 6-month-old twins to do training in a different state. We were living in America at the time. And I was so determined to do this course that I was willing to do that. And I just think, by the grace of God, when I rang up this university and I was trying to sort it all out, there was a lady there who said, why don't you call this other lady who did the course? She has young children and she might be able to give you some advice about how it worked for her, leaving her family and coming interstate to do this training. So I phoned up this lady, and she said to me, oh, do you know what, Elissa, there's a guy who does hypnotherapy training. He's excellent. And actually, he works in Tustin, California. Well, Tustin, California was about 10 minutes down the road from where I was living. And I feel like that was 100% the grace of God. Well, I was absolutely nuts and bonkers and willing to leave my family just to pursue some craving that I had inside of me, that this woman was able to say to me, don't do that. There's another man who can help you. And it just so happened that he was only 10 minutes down the road from me. So I went and did the training with him. And some of you might be thinking, why is this relevant? It's relevant because of the extent I was willing to go to pursue a dream that I had, that I wanted to do at the cost of my husband and my children, who were the closest people to me in my life. And I feel like even though I was nuts, God helped cradle me through that decision and took me into a situation that was not so extreme, because I don't know what would have happened if I had been persistent in following that dream. And this was about the time, I think, that my disease really got to a point where I was, my husband could see that something was really out of hand. We were really struggling in our marriage. I was becoming quite rough with my children. I had no patience. I had a lot of anger. The eating was all going on in the background, in the back of my head, a constant obsession, but I couldn't really identify that as the issue, because all these other relationship issues and the anger issues were so much in the forefront of my mind. And through this period of time, I was doing a lot of counseling. I did about 10 years of counseling trying to solve this problem that was me. Anyway, so what actually ended up happening is, at the same time as I was getting sicker and sicker, my husband, who's also an addict, was getting sicker and sicker, and he ended up in a 12-step program of recovery. And I heard him talking about what was happening with his thinking, the transformation that was happening in his thinking when he got into this 12-step program. And I remember saying to him, damn it, you're not leaving me behind. I can see you getting spiritually well and you're not leaving me behind. I felt like he had screwed up my life at that point, because I needed somebody to blame. And Mum, she was a total goner in my head. But I knew that there was something that was not quite right inside of me. So I joined a family program to help deal with this problem in my life, which was my addict husband. And in that program, I was encouraged to do a step 4. And when I did a step 4 in that program, I began to see my behavior. And it was as though all of a sudden, I'd known for a long time that there was something wrong with me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And all of a sudden, I began to see that, yes, maybe I really was part of this problem. So I continued in that program for a couple of years and felt like I, pretty much had it figured out. And my sponsor in that program said to me, I just wonder if you might find a 12-step program for food helpful. Because she'd heard me start talking about my food as something I did to try and control my life, something that I had control of in my life. She obviously heard something in that was enough for her to suggest that I go along to a 12-step program for food. So I went along to a couple of meetings, and heard someone talk about how she bought a whole block of chocolate for her kids and hid it in the cupboard and then took it out and ate the whole thing. And I thought, well, I've never done that, so I don't really belong here. That sounds very extreme. Of course, I never bought whole blocks of chocolate for my children. I always bought whole blocks of chocolate for myself. So I was never depriving my children of chocolate. Oh, I had a constant stash in the cupboard that I would take one piece from and walk away, and I'd come back 2 minutes later and take another piece from and walk away, and it would drive me nuts for another half an hour till I'd come back and get the next bit. Anyway, so I walked away for a year because I didn't feel like I related. But because I had heard those people share in those meetings, something in my awareness about food addiction, something in my mind shifted because I couldn't get it out of my mind. And a year later, I was invited to speak at I wasn't personally, the fellowship, the family fellowship I was a member of was invited to send a speaker to an event. So I went to represent the fellowship I was a part of. And when I was there, I heard 2 speakers from a food fellowship share. And when I heard them share their experience, one in particular mentioned the word food plan. And I went, oh. Someone else talked about a particular food item being the highlight of her day. She talked about having a milk Milo and that was the highlight of her day. And when I heard those 2 things, which might not mean a lot to anyone else listening here, but to me, that meant a lot. I had been wondering for that year, if you have a problem with food, how do you solve it? I know how an alcoholic stops drinking. He just puts down the alcohol. But how does a food addict stop eating? So the minute I heard this gentleman talk about a food plan, I went, there's something more going on here. You can surrender the food. And when I heard about that milk Milo, my mind went, I totally relate to that. I absolutely always have a food item that was the highlight of my day. It would keep changing, but I'd spend all day hanging out for that food item. So after hearing that sharing, 2 days later, I went to a 12-step food fellowship meeting again. And at that point, I feel like God had captured my heart when I heard those 2 people talk about the food plan and the milk Milo. And I wanted to know what the solution was. By this time, I felt like the anger was out of control. I'd been in a 12-step program. I was trying to work the 12 steps. I'd grown up in a religion, so I had God in my life. But I had this anger that was out of control. I was violent with my children. I had a marriage on the rocks. I still couldn't stand my mother, who was now living up the road from me as opposed to on another continent. So I had to deal with her more often. And I just felt like there were a lot of things in my life which were gradually getting worse. And I just wanted time out. I didn't want to kill myself, but I wanted time out from my life. I just wanted space from my head and space from the reality that was my life. And when I started coming to this 12-step food fellowship, I began to hear a solution that was very attractive. People whose lives had changed, people whose lives were very ordinary. And that was very attractive to me to hear a solution. It took me 6 months. I went on a food plan straight away. I was desperate. I basically went up to one particular lady and I begged her to put me on a food plan. She said, oh no, just wait, come to a few more minutes and just listen. And the next time I saw her, I said to her, no, I want to get started. I want that food plan. So I went on a food plan straight away, but I wasn't really ready to surrender. So about 6 months later, a surrender happened to me. And basically that was the point at which I'd already stopped drinking alcohol, because that was suggested to me right at the beginning, that I put down the alcohol with the food. So I'd stopped drinking. I was doing my best to stick to my food plan. I had surrendered my exercise, in the sense that I wasn't making any decisions around my exercise anymore. And there was actually one more thing that had to happen for me personally before I could completely let go. And I had an obsession with men and being attractive and dressing a certain way in my head that would be attractive to them. And I heard the experience of another woman in the program who talked to me about her experience with this. And I basically started changing the way I dressed as a way of letting go this obsession with men. And it was for me, when all four of those things went down, that finally a surrender happened to me, in the sense that I was 100% willing to follow every direction that my sponsor gave me. And once that surrender happened, I feel like God was able to begin working in my life. So I had been searching for God my whole life, had never been able to feel any kind of sense of peace, a very limited sense of connection. Obviously, my behavior was far from anything that a God would want me to be, I think. The book talks about having moral and philosophical convictions galore. We can have lots of great ideas about how we want to live our life, but that doesn't mean that we can live it well. And when the food went down, and those three other things for me with it, something happened. And what happened was I began to start feeling a little bit of a sense of peace. I'd always had this kind of blackness inside of me that all of a sudden one day I realized, when someone else was sharing a meeting, that blackness was no longer there. So there was a sense of freedom and a peace inside my heart that I had never had before. And instead of being a concept in my life, God became a reality. And I guess what I mean by that is, all of a sudden I had this two-way. I really want to talk about this, because this has been a real change in my life that has happened as a result of the program. So sponsorship was absolutely key, because I needed to stop listening to my own thinking. And coming to meetings was absolutely key, because when I hear other people's stories, people share with me their experience, and I learn from it. And working the steps was absolutely key in order to start emptying out all the crap that was inside of me, so that God could start coming in. So what began to happen with having God as a reality is, all of a sudden I had this two-way relationship, where I wasn't just kind of feeling like I was aimlessly searching for something that I couldn't connect with, but I began to get a real sense of trust and confidence that there is a higher power in my life that exists, that I trust completely. This is what I aim for in my thinking, that I trust completely, and that I want to direct my life 100%. The way that I do this is, I turn over my life. I ask for help in prayer. I thank my higher power, and I spend time sitting still so that that higher power can communicate with me. Now, I've put this into practice, this relationship with my higher power, which keeps growing and changing. And the result of that is that today, not only am I not eating, I'm not eating addictively. I do eat. I eat my food plan meals a day. I'm not eating addictively. I'm not interested in eating anything off my food plan. I still have a family. I still have a husband and 4 children that I cooked spaghetti bolognese for tonight. And it smelt really lovely, but actually I didn't want to eat it and it wasn't on my food plan. And I was quite happy to eat my meal, which my kids joke about and think is hilarious often. Because I have boiled potatoes every night. It's part of my food plan. That's probably another story. I've lost my train of thought. Oh, so not only do I not think about the food, I'm talking about the way God has transformed my life in a way that I couldn't do on my own. I stick to my food plan. I'm not interested in eating food off it today. That is not something I could do on my own before I came into this program and was surrendered. I have a relationship with my husband. And not only do I have a relationship with my husband, but I have a husband that absolutely adores me, which is not my work. That is the work of my higher power, because I could not make that happen. And I have 4 children who want to spend time around me. And my eldest, my son, who received a lot of my anger, is a child who, when I say goodbye to him at school, he has this little ritual. He has to kiss me on this cheek and then this cheek, and then my chin, then my nose and my head, and then I have to kiss him back. And this is a little boy who is completely afraid to be around me. I have friends. I have a relationship with my mother. I took her to the airport today. I gave her a hug. I gave her a kiss. And there was no tension inside of me. It just was. And the reason why I'm sharing these relationships with you and why I spent time at the beginning talking about relationships is because this program is not just about the food. The food has to go down. The things I'm addicted to have to go down if I want to have a connection to a higher power and the rest of the people in my life. And when I do that, my experience has been that something dramatic has changed. That old life that I used to have is not my life anymore. That was Elissa in the disease. The person I am today and am becoming today is the real Elissa that God always wanted me to be. And that's an Elissa who is learning how to love and how to care for others, who's able to have relationships, who's not obsessing about the food. I've been given a new life. And what's really exciting is when I come to these meetings and I hear other people share, I know that there's still a lot ahead of me to come. You know, I'm just scratching the surface of this new life. And so I am a grateful addictive eater who is going to keep coming, because I know that there's the best is yet ahead. So it's good to be here. Thank you for your time.